Philo of Alexandria was born in 20 BC or thereabouts and died in 50 AD. So his period covers the life of Jesus Christ. Philo is an interesting figure, a Jew with a Greek name, part of the world of Hellenized Judaism. He has studied philosophy, studied Aristotle and Plato, and of course is a faithful student of the Old Testament. We find in his writings an attempt to integrate systematically the thought of the major Greek philosophers and the scriptural truths of the Old Testament. Christianity is not merely a development out of Judaism. The early Jewish Christians did not regard themselves as less Jewish. Rather, we find in the early Jewish Christians the division of religious thought into sects, not unlike the divisions common at the time of philosophy in the West. To be a Hellenized Jew at the time of the life of Jesus Christ is, among other considerations, to be a scholar, someone who has perhaps gone to Athens, but in any case to have regarded the ideas taught in Athens as the apex of philosophical wisdom. Even in Philo's time, Athens remains the brightest spot on every scholar's map. Once there, the visiting scholar sees not merely the statues and classical architecture, one also breathes the vapors and hears the resonances of that illustrious but now long bygone time. The schools of Athens are still the best. Alexandria has a great library, no doubt, but it's essentially a center for research, far less part of the living and long debate, still conducted with vigor in Athens at that very time. Now, when the early Jewish Christians begin the formulation of what will come to be called Christianity, their appeals are within a philosophically competitive context that includes Stoicism at its center. St. Paul addresses his letters to people in the vast Roman world as he travels from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. He will confront not only peoples whose practices vary widely, whose own native ideas and theological convictions are of a sort that one would never have found in Athens or in Rome, but also those developed intelligences and philosophical sophistication recently refined by study in Athens and study of Greek philosophy. So it's not surprising that one of the characteristics of early Christian teaching is this transparent desire to establish the articles of faith, as it were, the teachings of the true religion, on a foundation that is intellectually satisfying, intellectually rich and convincing. Thus, it is not surprising that in the writings of Paul himself, one will find ideas drawn from Stoic teaching. He was surely exposed to it in his native Tarsus, and it is voiced without attribution in his reflections on the natural world and its ordering. Consider Corinthians 11:14. Now, so too are Stoic influences evident in his treatment of one's belief in God being a natural inclination, a belief as a natural inclination, not unlike the Stoic theory of affinities. Indeed, that Stoicism was recognized as perhaps the worthiest adversary is clear from the arguments of the early fathers of the Church against such ideas as the physicality of God. The running battle against such pagan notions will bring out some of the more discerning elements in early Christian philosophy, as produced by such figures as Tertullian and Origen, the former actually citing Zeno and Cleanthes favorably. Now again, these debts and debates were inevitable and productive. The early fathers of the Church had to reconcile the teachings of the Church, the message contained in the life of Christ himself, with a philosophy respected as one of the great achievements of human thought, even if pagan thought. There should not be, therefore, unbridgeable distance between the lessons of faith and the lessons of philosophy, the two hopelessly incompatible. So there is much intellectual energy devoted to having the philosophical light brought to bear on the authority of faith. And given the historical period in which these developments are taking place, it is Stoic philosophy that must provide the bridge, or at least the major planks of any bridge that will lead to the central tenets of Christianity. Let us consider, then, some of the features of Stoicism as these might be promulgated at the time of the Jewish Christians, as these might be incorporated into the writings of Philo and others, seeing a mission similar to the one Philo had set for himself. Now, there are obvious points of compatibility, but also problem areas that have to be dealt with. First, the Stoics, for the Stoics in any case, what might be called the God of the Stoics is not a personal being concerned with human welfare as such, but a powerful divine fire of sorts working through physical and material modes of operation. Nonetheless, this force or power is rational in its essential nature and immortal. Now, on this account, the defining feature of the creative power of the universe is inexhaustibility and its rationality. Stoicism offers the obvious proofs for this. Consider only the lawfulness of the cosmos itself. So on Stoic teaching, particularly later Stoic teaching, knowledge of this kind of divine influence is one of the very preconceptions that a rational being has. This is a very important point. Recall Aristotle's claim that if the art of shipbuilding were in the wood, we would have ships by nature. Well, what the Stoics are getting at with this notion of a concept of a divine being, part of our very intuitive resources, that belief in such a being is sort of built in, is that a rational being, recognizing the orderliness and lawfulness of the cosmos, must match that up without further deliberation with the notion of some rational agency behind it, recognizing that you could not get anything of this sort accidentally. This is an intuitive conception, natural to the ordinary percipient, who is already a rational being. Such a being, seeing the world and the heavens, immediately understands that this just didn't come from nothing. So again, one need only consult the intuitive resources present in all human beings to ground a belief in a rational plan for the cosmos. Now, St. Cyprian in the 3rd century would base his arguments for universal brotherhood and the wrongfulness of cruelty to slaves on just this Stoic theory of human rationality. Slaves as human beings are composites of just those elements of matter and psychic energy that render any being a human being, and as such, the member of that common family of such beings. This, of course, is Stoic from start to finish. In these several respects, the Christian fathers were able to argue that certain ultimate truths are actually part of the intuitive resources of our very rationality, gaining for us, as a brotherhood, a special standing within the natural order. For the cosmos to remain lawfully ordered, there must be the constant participation of the Logos itself. So there is an immediate presence of the divine agency in the cosmos, which is to say that the God of the Stoics, though not the personal God of Christianity and Judaism, is not remote from the affairs of the world, but integral to those affairs. The events of the physical and natural world are dynamic, and these must record again the constant participation of the divine fire, the Logos, the creative force. Here's this Stoic bridge to Christianity. Now let's put these notions together. And if we do so, we reach the possibility of a physically present and knowable God. That is, you get something not unlike the God of the Hebrews, having a rational plan and order of things, being present in the world, revealing himself through his works, and working on the matter, on the physics of reality, in a divine way to realize divine purposes. The Jews, the Christians, and the Jewish Christians deny the materiality of God as envisaged by Stoic philosophy. So here we have a bind of sorts. A Stoic philosophical authority for a rational plan, something that is active and present in the world, something that makes the world conform to the scheme, but at the same time not something revealed directly to human intelligence. This is a problem. How are we to reconcile the competing views? It is not a compromise solution, but a radically new idea, namely that of God becoming incarnated in the form of a human being who will teach lessons and serve as a living example for a distracted human race to be redeemed through his sacrifice. Here is God made man, which is to say, the immaterial incarnating itself materially in order to realize or further guarantee what on a Stoic account might be regarded as the Logos. Again now, the God of the Stoics, this divine fire, is not knowable as such. The reconciliation with the Hebrew account is God made man. How does the creative fire order and organize things? It does so nomologically, that is to say, the manner in which the cosmos obeys the precepts that are central to Stoicism is by law, by natural law, by physical law. Things behave the way they do because they're regulated by gnomic principles. Nomos in the Greek is law. Well, this aspect of Stoic teaching matches up nearly perfectly with the Decalogue. How are we to understand what God expects of us? Consult the 10 Commandments. These come directly from God. And what are these commandments? They are the laws of life. They call for pious respect for the God of all, for the recognition that reality is a created reality, that it is an ordered affair that represents the perfected nature of whatever creative energy brought it about. Nothing is to be placed in the scale of value than what has brought everything about. First, I am the Lord thy God, do you see? Now, why would such an entity do all this? This is something Stoicism, at least early and middle Stoicism, tends to leave unanswered, and which the Jewish Christians will answer. The cosmic creation is not undertaken for no reason at all. You don't order the universe. You don't impose lawfulness on the affairs of matter. You don't give it shape and form. You don't give it function. You don't undertake the construction of everything there is through a perfect understanding of all possibilities unless, what? Unless the Creator has and takes an interest in this. At work here is not an Aristotelian rational plan or the God of the Stoics. It is the God of the Hebrews, a providential God who takes an interest in his creation and takes a particular interest in that part of the creation that most reflects his goodness and perfection. That part of his creation that is, although fallen, in some sense, perfectible. This is the God of the Jews, the God of Islam, the God of Christianity. Now this, of course, raises any number of questions. Here's a providential God who takes a personal interest in us. How distant this is from Olympianism and the divine fire of the Stoics. This God offers what is good for us for our sake, one who has, as it were, befriended mankind, as does a father befriend his children. The original notion of a shared brotherhood is the Stoic notion of our occupying a common oikos in virtue of the fact that we are rational, language-using entities. Here is that one common feature, that one common element in our humanity that separates us from the balance of creation. We're the ones who talk. Well, this can either be a source of a kind of puffed-up pride, look here, universe, we're the ones who talk, and you don't, or it can be parlayed into something quite consequential. The Stoics do parlay it into something quite consequential, particularly in the domain I would refer to as the juridical domain, the domain of justice and law and justification and reasons for action, the plan of society and its proper moral aims. But when you add to this a providential God that has endowed us with these abilities, that has created a world that is right for us, for our good, so that we might conduct ourselves in this world in such a way as to earn the eternal presence of this very God for all time. Well, this is something that the Stoics do not offer in their philosophy. This is something that is present in forms of Judaism, particularly the forms of Judaism espoused by the Jewish Christians. And of course, it's going to be a central doctrinal teaching of the earliest Christian church. Now, with a personal and providential God as Father of all, universal brotherhood gains a new meaning. It doesn't matter whether you come from Assyria, Corinth, Egypt, Athens, or Rome, whether you're a sailor, a shoemaker, or a king, you have this common heritage. Now, there is a foundational egalitarian precept not to be found in Greek philosophy and its pagan derivatives. For us all to be the children of a single creator and to have universal brotherhood on that basis, to be equal in that fundamental respect, may I say, is not a thought that would have cropped up ordinarily in the Hellenic world. It might have been regarded as hubristic. But on this Christian account, no one is of greater moral worth than another, whatever their socioeconomic status, whatever their titles or achievements might be. Now, this must have had an extraordinary effect on countless people who had been oppressed, controlled, dismissed, disfranchised, owing to their birth, their language, their socioeconomic status, their skills, their position in the world. Here's a message that says, none of that counts for anything fundamentally, because fundamentally you all come from the same shop. You are children of a providential God who has created the cosmos, and it is good, an ordered and reasonable cosmos, fit to be the home for that ordered, reasonable, and language-using creature that reflects in its rationality nothing less than the image of God himself, imago Dei. We've come quite a distance in the history of ideas from anything Homer had in mind, and I would say even from what Plato had in mind. The early Christian fathers are Neoplatonists, as the expression goes, and will rely quite heavily on Plato's teaching. But their religious philosophy is not something that arises directly from Plato's dialogues. They are intimations, but not anticipations, of the Christian worldview. One problem solved, 10 problems created. Here's a providential God, really has our interests in mind. How come we're so nasty? Killing each other, making war, steeped in vice. Why do babies die of cancer? What are we to say about the problem of evil in the world? Why is it things usually don't work? With all this rationality, how come Rome is collapsing from within? If the whole scheme has been assembled by this great and loving logician, this ultra-rational, spiritus being, and put together for us, how come things are in the state they're in? And if we bear the mark of this Maker, if in fact the mark of the Maker can be seen in all his works, and the very image of the Maker is seen in this particular work called man, why are we the way we are, bogged down in ignorance and petty villainies? How is evil to be understood? Here's another problem. You now have not only a providential divinity that contains all creative power within itself, but by its very nature, then, this is an omniscient and an omnipotent entity, meaning there is a personally knowable God who could have made things any way he wanted to have them, whose will is absolutely unopposable. Well, that must mean, then, that my fate is determined. God certainly knows everything I'm going to do with my life, and if God knows everything I'm going to do with my life, it must be because the script of my life was written not only from a time out of memory, but out of time itself. Now, is this just an echo of the ancient Greek sense of the fates of Moira and Lachesis? Do we have here a fatalistic doctrine being spawned by a religion that is supposedly a religion of joy and happiness? To accept Stoicism totally is to accept a rational order that is so inflexible that everything is determined by it. You have a determinate universe, and of course the question that immediately arises is the extent to which we can enjoy anything like moral freedom in a world or in a cosmos in which everything that happens could not be otherwise than it is. The Stoics were deterministic in their physics, but not in their psychologies. Stoicism is an ethical philosophy that must allow not only the power of reason, but also the power to defy reason. But why then would this omniscient, omnipotent, providential God of the Jews and Christians constitute us in such a way that we could defy reason? And what of that apatheia? What will early Christianity do with that aspect of Stoic teaching? Epictetus, never say of anything that I've lost it, only that I've given it back. Marcus Aurelius, a philosopher king, a Roman emperor, he's a Stoic. With some reluctance, he's executed and sacrificed many Christians. His meditations are powerful and moving. Still, he sees in the great order of things a need to destroy those who are the cause of disorder. So even the committed Stoic is not unwaveringly apathetic. Well, I say, what's going to be the fate of apatheia in the Judeo-Christian and then Christian world? How can it be incorporated and promulgated as a philosophical teaching? Apatheia becomes a way of reconciling oneself not to the nomological framework of a rationally ordered universe, but to the will of God. It's reconciling oneself to the fact that the will of God ultimately is the cause of all things. So the Stoic sense of apatheia will ground a certain aspect of Christian teaching, fortifying the Christian with resignation, with a kind of Stoic courage, a willingness to die for what he believes in, a willingness to recognize that the fate of the flesh is quite different from the fate of the soul, and that the intentions of the Creator are realized beyond the pale of earthly existence. These are well-told tales, their foundations often somewhat obscure. So here then is a quite cluttered period in the history of ideas, replete with Greek and Roman influences, colliding with already ancient Hebraic teachings, the authority of Scripture. All this as the Church Fathers attempt to reconcile Christian teaching with the pagan philosophies of Athens. Then, too, there are saintly figures openly hostile to the whole program of philosophy. There are scholars such as Origen and Tertullian, impatient with the attention paid to what Plato and Aristotle had to say. Why bother with all this? Just take a look at what they made of their own world, their own debaucheries. What is required for one to live the right sort of life is nothing more than the teachings of Christ. No more, no less. We need not speculate any longer on the ultimate meaning of things, because Jesus has come and now we know. Now, I do want to say this about that, as a famous former president might have put it. There is in this view the kernel of an anti-intellectualism in the early church, and it too must be dealt with if the church itself, if the faith itself, is going finally to be erected on a broad, intellectual, rational, teachable foundation, able to appeal to the thinking parts of the world. It will not be enough to say, Jesus came, was here for 30 plus years, said these things, no more need be considered. So here we have a period of Roman hegemony that nonetheless depends on a civil world that is unraveling, even as these great emperors and lawyers write and work. It's also an ancient world of the Hebrews, a monotheistic world that turns its back on Rome. It's a world of Jewish scholarship that finds in Athens an illumination that cannot be found merely in Scripture. It's a world of scribes and Pharisees, first with one and then another account of orthodoxy. It's a world of Greek philosophical diasporas in which teachers can be found even in the most improbable places, brought there first by Alexander and now as part of larger Roman detachments. It's a world that is regrouping. It's becoming a world rather different from the classical world, still but fadingly recognizable as classical. Stoicism provides a bridge from that classical world to the one that will finally be recognizably Christian. And it does this by its teaching. It does it by its influence on Rome and Roman administrative law, by certain philosophical precepts that match up better than others with what Christians adopt as a matter of faith. Now, I do want to say something about a Stoic bridge to Christianity in comparison with the religious teachings of Christianity itself. To say that there is a kernel of anti-intellectualism in the early church, to say there is an almost, to use an expression, an almost Turkish contempt for the mere philosophizing of pagans, is to say that some of the early fathers of the church actually took the divinity of Jesus Christ as establishing the epistemic and moral authority of those teachings. It's not that because these utterances were made by Jesus Christ, we need not inquire further. It's because as these were the teachings of Jesus Christ, they are the last word on all things true. And thus, coming after the pagan philosophies, they give us truths that were not available to the pagan philosophers. Good reason for Plato and Aristotle and their schools and disciples to keep the midnight oil burning, because after all they had not had the benefit of the life of Christ as an example. But now that that example is available to us, now that those pages of teachings can be read by us, now that we see the kind of life we are supposed to live, now that we know our universal brotherhood is actually, in a manner of speaking, genetically established, owing to a common father, all of this pagan thought, all of this hair-splitting, this logic, this analytic philosophy is simply a distraction. It's the sort of thing we can safely move past. Rome is not falling because it lacks philosophical teachers. It is up to its ears in Greek tutors. Its official documents are written in Greek. Its children are brought up by Greeks. Its statues and paintings and buildings are pastiches of the classical world of Athens. And look what's happening to Rome. So Rome, for all its reliance on Greece, and with an army to go along with it, is not able to withstand the changes of history. Christianity has to be based on something firmer than that, something much more resistant to change. It has to be based on truths that are not mere productions of philosophy, but are creations of divinity made available to us by the grace of God. So it's not an anti-intellectualism with a sneer. It's rather more the attitude of a highly enlightened being or community toward those who are very, very clever but less enlightened, and saying that we can have patience for them. We can understand the mistakes they made, but we are under no obligation to imitate their modes of thought, and less their modes of conduct. There was a Stoic bridge to Christianity. Once you got on the other side, you got there as a Christian, and to a considerable extent, philosophy was left back on the other side, for better and to some extent for worse.